Welcome to Liverpool Laser Talks. My name is Mark Ruffley. I am one of the laser hosts. My co-chair, Professor Caroline Wilkinson, is the director of the School of Art and Design, who can't be here with us this evening, but sends her best wishes to the speakers and to everybody involved in the project. We're going to pay homage tonight to a wonderful artist, Fanchon Fröhlich, and hopefully you'll learn lots about her and her husband's relationships, but also the impact on Liverpool. Just a little bit about Liverpool Laser Talks in general. We are a series of art science evening rendezvous, which are free public talks that engage publics in conversation around topics that are art science related. We are part of a network of global talks, so there are around 42 laser hosts worldwide. We are the third laser host in the UK, the other being in Dartington in the southwest, and London Laser also. So just to be aware that laser talks do exist, and they are often available recorded, so that's why we're recording the session today. But because of the pandemic, a lot of lasers do take place via Zoom also. So that's great in opening up that worldwide network of art science interactions. I would like in just a moment to invite our speakers up one by one. We have two speakers in person and one joining us via Zoom. Each speaker will speak for around 15 to 20 minutes each. There'll be time for questions at the end of all three presentations. And then we will move downstairs into one of our gallery spaces in the building to look at three new digital portraits created by Face Lab at Liverpool University of Fanchon. Finally, on my introduction, just to say that the laser talks are supported by the Art and Science Masters Programme that I am the programme leader for, and I'm very open to any questions about that programme. So, I'm firstly going to introduce Gerard Highland. So, Gerard entered Herbert Fröhlich's Theoretical Physics Department in 1965, becoming, as it turned out, his last doctoral student. Throughout his academic career, Highland maintained close contact with Fröhlich, collaborating with him in various research topics and contributing to two Festschrifts. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah.
After Fröhlich's death in 1991, Highland remained in contact with his widow, Fanchon, who accompanied him to several international conferences. This evening, Gerard would like to focus principally on just two episodes in Fanchon's long life, which are connected with the work of her husband, namely his introduction of quantum field theory into solid-state physics, and his ideas concerning the possibility that the orderly functioning of a living system is connected with the existence therein of what he called coherent excitations, for which we have Fanchon to thank.
Well, if you'll indulge me, I would just like to preface my presentation with a few personal remarks, some of which have already been mentioned by is it Mark? Mark, yes. In connection with my contact with Herbert and Fanchon Fröhlich, which dates back quite a long time. I was first introduced to Fanchon by her husband, the renowned international theoretical physics, Herbert Fröhlich, at an evening reception in the early 1960s, hosted by the University of Liverpool in the Victoria building on Brownlow Hill. I became, as has been mentioned, Herbert's final PhD student, during which time I enjoyed many social evenings at the interesting house in Greenhays Road, where I got to know Fanchon better and to be introduced to a number of her wide, eclectic circle of friends. She was a well-known, vivacious figure in Liverpool, and after her husband's death, I often accompanied her to the Everyman and to the Quarter restaurant near the art school where she was once a student. Well, I was lucky enough to know Fanchon for over 50 years, and her husband for 25. So proceeding to the main body of my talk, and I apologise if it's a bit too physicky, but I'm a physicist and That's what I've been asked to speak about. What I would like to present to you is Fanchon and Herbert as a kind of Leonardine double act, to see how they interacted together. Well, having completed her studies in the philosophy of science under Rudolf Carnap in Chicago, Fanchon arrived in Liverpool in 1949, where she stayed for some time before proceeding to Oxford to read post-Wittgenstein linguistic philosophy at Somerville College. Whilst in Liverpool, she attended a number of meetings of the local German circle, which was frequented by a number of European expats of an intellectual kind, including also some European nobility, minor nobility. And it was there that she was introduced to Herbert Fröhlich, the internationally renowned theoretical physicist, who the year before had been appointed to the first chair of theoretical physics at the University of Warwick, a position he held with great distinction for 25 years, after which he became Professor Emeritus until his death at the age of 85 in 1991. Well, one day Herbert did not appear at morning departmental coffee, and neither did he turn up for afternoon tea, which was very unusual for him, and people were very curious why this was so, because he was known not to have been abroad on one of his many trips. And upon inquiry of another member of staff who had also been absent at coffee, was told that Herbert and Fanchon had got married that morning, and he was now upstairs in his office catching up with his work. At that time he was 44 and she was 22. The person who was also absent in the morning was Bella Sigeti, who was either a best man or witness at the wedding. Well, Herbert, I'll use first names, make things simpler. So Herbert is the man and Fanchon is his wife. Was well known for his pre-war work on the Meson theory of nuclear forces, and for his many important contributions to the field of dielectrics. Well, Meson theory offers an understanding of the stability of nuclei in terms of the existence of a strong attractive force based on the exchange of particles between the nucleons in a nucleus. These particles are called mesons, because they have a mass intermediate between that of an electron and a proton. In his work on dielectrics, these are a class of electrically insulating materials, which are very important, obviously, for electrical science. And his work one of the main themes of his work was trying to understand how or what causes these materials to lose their insulating behavior at very high currents or very high electric field strengths, so-called dielectric breakdown. And in the course of this work, quite by chance, he happened to learn that it had then, this was in the second half of the 1930s, it had just been discovered that across the membrane of an alive cell is a very small electric potential difference. Although very small, Herbert immediately recognized, because of the small distance between the inner and outer layers of the membrane, this implies an enormous electric field, so large that in a non-biological material it would certainly cause dielectric breakdown. As a matter of interest, he then estimated the frequency at which the inner and outer oppositely charged surface of a cell vibrate together. and came up with a value of about 10 to the 11 hertz, which is in the microwave region of the electromagnetic spectrum, which at the time was not sort of technologically realizable. Radar, remember, hadn't been invented by then, discovered by then. But we shall return to microwaves later on in the talk. Well, just prior to his marriage to Fanchon, Herbert had made a breakthrough which was crucial to the eventual understanding of the phenomenon of superconductivity. This is the ability of some metals, when cooled to very low temperatures, to suddenly lose their electrical resistance and become perfect conductors. Well, this breakthrough was contingent upon his introduction of ideas with which he was familiar in the case of nuclear physics in connection with the Meson theory of nuclear forces, which now led him to realize that in addition to being responsible for the electrical resistance of a material, the interaction of the conduction electrons with the lattice vibrations, or the quantum mechanical counterpart of that, which is known as phonons, entail the existence of an attractive interaction between electrons, just as the exchange of mesons in the nucleus gave an attraction between the nucleons. It was later shown that this attraction was the basis of all the conduction electrons forming pairs, electron pairs with identical properties. Now, since each pair is a quantum mechanical thing, it happens because of quantum mechanics, having the whole lot of electrons, a macroscopic number, means that we here have an example of quantum mechanics emerging up to the macroscopic level. Normally one thinks of quantum mechanics as a tool for understanding very microscopic systems. And by the time most systems become large enough, or typical quantum mechanical effects are washed out. But in this case, they're not. And we shall see other examples later. Now, that the same electron-lattice interaction that is responsible for electrical resistivity apparently underlay the exact converse of that, namely superconductivity, was at the time greeted with great incredulity. But before long, there was experimental confirmation of Herbert's ideas. And the following year, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. Well, 2 years later, in about 1952, he published a more systematic application of the ideas he'd used in nuclear physics, the so-called quantum field theory, to condensed matter physics. And this revolutionized the future development of the subject. And this he considered to be his most important legacy to theoretical physics. Well, after her marriage, Fanchon continued to study at Somerville College until she graduated in 1953. And during that time, Elizabeth Anscombe, who was a student of Wittgenstein, made a lasting impression on her, and she often talked to me about Elizabeth. She then enrolled at the Liverpool Art School, or college, and later worked with Peter Lanyon in Cornwall and etched with Bill Hayter in Paris, about which I'm sure we'll hear more from the other speakers later on. Well, in 1961, Herbert gave his wife's name to a group of subatomic particles, the existence of which he had predicted on the basis of an ingenious new theory of his, and which turned out to be have properties identical to those later discovered for a certain variety of mesons. But unfortunately, the name never caught on, maybe because in the paper which he suggested it, he wrote it in Greek. Not knowing Greek, I haven't been able to ascertain because in Greek, Fanchon, it has some relevant meaning to what he wanted to describe. And we now come to 1965, which is a very important year in the couple's life. where Herbert accompanied Fanchon to a conference in the Tyrol dealing with certain aspects of life, living things and consciousness and all those sort of things. While he enjoyed himself skiing and climbing, he was a very, very proficient rock climber and skier. It was there that she met a man called Maurice Marois of the l'Institut de la Vie in Paris, who, upon learning that she was the wife of this renowned theoretical physicist, Herbert Fröhlich, was keen that he be persuaded to turn his energies to trying to bridge the gap between physics and biology, which although physics, and this in fact Fanchon succeeded in doing, much against Herbert's initial reluctance. He didn't want to be diverted from his work in physics, but she prevailed and she got her own way. And this opened up a whole new era in the understanding of living systems. Because up till then, the quantum mechanics had mainly been used in connection with calculating the structure of biomolecules, which turned out to be extremely complicated, far more complicated than what's normally found in physics. The type of systems considered in physics are one-dimensional things with a few atoms, so one can do exact calculations. But in biology, that is not the case. But complicated as this structure is, Herbert noted that it's the same whether the system is alive or dead. Right? And the orderly functioning that is a better discriminant of an alive system is more likely connected with the existence therein of some kind of coherent motional order connected with the excitation of a single type of vibrational mode, akin to that which he was already familiar in physics, such as in the case of the laser, for example. Now, just in the case of a laser, where optical pumping is necessary to get the thing to act as a laser and to produce a beam of coherent light, so he had the idea that metabolic energy supply in a living system might similarly impose coherence on a set of vibrating electric dipoles, of which there are many varieties in a living biological system. In the conjectured coherent state, the individual dipoles would vibrate in phase with one another to produce what might be called a macroscopically significant vibration of electric polarization in the form of a giant electric dipole, which is here the counterpart of the coherent light field in the case of a laser, and constitutes a highly unexpected manifestation, again, of quantum mechanics on a macroscopic scale, this time at physiological temperature, not at very low temperatures as needed in superconductivity. And then soon after this conference, he set to, and on the basis of a very simple but rather general model of a biological system fed with energy from metabolism and containing a dipolar cell layer, for example, he was able to show that these conjectures were in fact upheld on the basis of a quantitative calculation, provided the rate of energy, the rate of metabolic energy supply exceeds a certain critical threshold, just as it must in the case of the pumping of a laser. And he pointed out that the existence of this macroscopically significant polarization in the material has certain consequences. Because of the elasticity of a cell, this polarization field can cause distortion, elastic deformation, distortions of the cell surface, which could be implicated in cell division, and hence also in an understanding of cancer, in which the control of cell division breaks down. Well, in the following years gave many experimental support to Herbert's ideas of coherent excitations in living biological systems. In particular, the discovery of non-thermal biological effects in living systems produced by irradiating them with very weak microwave radiation. And remember, the cell membrane vibrates at microwave frequencies, so one gets some type of interference with that. Well, Fanchon was very enthusiastic about this work, in which, in a sense, she'd acted as a midwife in getting him to do it against his will on behalf of Marois. In particular, because a later development of the theory by Herbert himself offered a novel approach to understanding certain aspects of brain function, such as the electroencephalogram and even consciousness, both of which implicated stochastic deterministic chaos. Well, during the later 1960s, Fanchon authored a number of plays under the pseudonym Leslie Faust, and together with Herbert devised a ballet based on the interaction of subatomic particles, which they tried to get produced at Covent Garden, but sadly that was not to be. But it's very interesting to see how you can make a ballet out of the way different elementary particles interact with one another. In 1972, a bit later on, she accepted on Herbert's behalf, while she was in hospital recuperating from a major operation, the prestigious Max Planck Medal of the German Physical Society. And during the later 1970s, when Herbert had recovered, they were both very keen supporters of the Great George Street Community Art Project, centred, I think, on the Blackie. Well, after Herbert's death, Fanchon founded something she called collective phenomenon, in which two or more painters collaborate on a single horizontal surface, one painter either continuing the theme established by his predecessor or contradicting it, thereby developing a kind of visual counterpoint. Well, originally Collective Phenomena was the title of a journal founded by Herbert in 1972, devoted to the study of the holistic behaviour of large interacting systems in physics, chemistry, biology, and even social science. The description of which, however, is contingent upon the discovery of the appropriate macroscopic concepts that have no meaning at the microscopic level, at the level of individual components, but only assume as an emergent property of the largeness and the interactions within the system. One might think of the pressure in a gas has no meaning for an individual gas molecule. And this cooperative and sort of collective behaviour reflects very much the fact that such a large interacting system is far more than the sum of its parts. Well, just to finish off, I have absolutely no doubt that Fanchon and Herbert would have been very enthusiastic supporters of this laser event, and I can think of no couple who better personify Leonardine complementarity, as one might put it, than they do. Their sort of quasi-symbiotic relationship with respect to their mutual interest in art and science are surely virgin unique, and perhaps they should have statues in Lime Street Station together with the other people there. Thank you very much for your time.
So thank you, Gerard, for that introduction to Herbert and Fanchon. I'm all in support of the statues at Lime Street Station. I think clearly it is warranted. I'm going to now move on to introducing our next speaker, Terry Duffy, who's an international artist with reputation for unique and challenging work. He has exhibited in London, Paris, Berlin, Cape Town, and many more. Duffy was born in Liverpool at the age of 13 and won a scholarship to art school. Following this, he trained as a lithographer and a photographer, and for several years worked in print and design studios in London. He founded Arena Studios in Liverpool in 1985 and the British Art and Design Association in 1986. He received many awards and international media recognition. And in just a moment, Terry will give an introduction to Fanchon and her extensive archive of paintings, prints, photography, and written works, and explain how, as a woman, she found it difficult to progress and be recognised in a male-dominated art world. She was, as Terry will explain, an outstanding, unsung, abstract expressionist artist in her lifetime, and how this will now begin to change with Tuesday. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you. As an artist, it's really difficult to know how to follow Gerard, because the things he talks about seem so technical and in-depth and so on. And as an artist, what you do is you go in the studio and you do things. You express yourself. You don't need theories and so on and so forth. It's about you and the thing that's in front of you. And so it's amazing to listen to somebody who has that knowledge. And obviously, my knowledge is very simple in a way, and that's how do you create? And I got to know Fanchon around about 1992, a year after Herbert had died. And she was in the 60s then. And she was just this incredibly vibrant person who didn't let you get away with anything. She would just question you about everything. And she would say the most amazing things. The science and philosophy would just sort of roll out of her mouth. It's like, stop, Fanchon. I don't understand what you're talking about. And I never really got to see her work. I never got to see her paintings. I saw much later on an exhibition she had, not long before she died, in London during, I don't know the year, but it was in the East End somewhere, and she was doing another one of her collaborative phenomena works. And I'd done something called Art Games many years before, and I had to be critical, because what it was a bit more like a sort of 60s happening. And so everybody could just throw paint around. And to me, that was just like really bad. You just don't throw paint around. So if you have a big canvas, she would use this bit, and somebody else would use that bit, and somebody else would use that bit. And for me, that just wasn't interaction. So my advice to her was, no, what you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to change the other person's work. And you do it in your own time. And this is what Art Games was. So give them 5 minutes. So you've got this great big piece of paper or this canvas. You decide on the people who are going to contribute to this work. You decide, let's be really detailed here. Let's decide how many colours we've got. Because as artists, that's what we do. That's our science. We don't just have a palette. We don't just use colours arbitrarily. We actually use them specifically. So you know what it's like. I have this tiny tube of purple because it's a nightmare purple. So occasionally I might go squirt and use a bit of purple. But most of the time I'm using primaries and so on because I can mix a world of colours just with those simple colours. So I say 5 minutes to do your bit, and then the next person has 5 minutes, and the next person has 5 minutes, and that will totally change. And that's how, in the end, her final collaborative phenomena were far more challenging and upsetting as well, because people didn't like it. It wasn't as friendly as what she did. I hope you can understand that. You'd have to see a performance of it, and hopefully one of these days you will see a performance. Anyway, we became great friends, so much so, and when we get into, I think she's nearly 80, she even comes to Venice to see my exhibition in Venice during the Biennale, and she's on 2 walking sticks. I mean, this person's got so much personality and energy, even though her body is giving up. She's going all that way. And I don't know if you've been to Venice, but if you've got 2 walking sticks, it's not the place to wander around. There are so many little bridges and steps, and there she was. She loved it so much, she came back the following day, which was really nice of her. Anyway, she dies in 2016, and 24 hours later, I get a tap on my shoulder as an exhibition from a chap who was an executor of her will, and said, Fanchon had asked me to sort out, the words were, sort out her work. I didn't realise how daunting this was until I went to the house. So they gave me the keys and entered this 4-story villa. She was the last bohemian in Liverpool, I'm sure. She was just, she had the most fantastic soirees where if there was anybody of any intellectual or great talent, she'd have a soiree. Let's all have a soiree and we'll do things. And the composers would arrive, poets, Russians. I remember this Russian guy standing up and going, it's my turn, and he would speak these and he would sing, and so there were amazing occasions. And so I'm in this house that is totally bohemian. The top floor bathroom, you cannot get into it because the vines have taken over from the outside. Any crack in the window, the vine came through. Crack in the ceiling, the vine came through. Throughout the house, there are mirrors and foil paper everywhere, so that you see your reflection constantly. And this is some sort of, I don't understand it, some Buddhist thing about seeing yourself or whatever. She never cooked. That's how she was totally feminist. She refused to cook. If you wanted to see her, you went to the Quarter. Gerard has mentioned the Quarter. She would cycle to the Quarter, and after a few drinks, she would get a taxi back. And to this day, people still say, "Where's that lady?" And they would help her in the taxi and put the bike in. I don't know what she did the other end, because if you went to the house, it was very difficult to get to the front door because everything was so overgrown. There were great branches lying across, and you'd be trying to lift these sort of tree branches and work your way through this enchanted garden. And it was a big garden as well. And eventually get there. And she lived there alone from 91 onwards, not really scared of anything. She had this Buddhist temple on the top floor and a studio. And the rest of it was just artworks, which I think you've seen some of them. Anyway, so I'm wondering if I'm the only person in this house. And as I'm walking around, there are thousands of books. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of paintings. Everything is just stacked everywhere. There are record collections, sound recordings. This place is just wild with things. It's just like, how do you deal with this? How do I sort it out? The attitude of most people who were also there. So after a couple of weeks, sorry, I'll rephrase that. After a couple of weeks, there were other people invited to assess things like the furniture and the clothing and so on. She was very fashionable. She bought things in Paris and so on and so forth. But she liked going to charity shops. She liked anything stylish you could get in a charity shop. I went in the basement, and it seems I found out later that she locked the door on the basement something like 25 years earlier, and basically never went down there. and it was rammed with artworks. I thought, this is so bad down here, and I'll tell you it's bad because it was thick with moths and all sorts of things eating everything. And we're talking about a basement as big as this room. And there were these other people started turning up to do with the clothes and stuff, and they said, so they'd make these opinions about, why don't you just bin it all? Because she's nobody. The work is worthless. Just get a skip and throw it all in there, because if you put it in an auction, it won't go for anything. I have to say she chose the right person to sort of work out, because I have this respect for other artists and scientists and musicians and so on and so forth, because they concentrate on things. They really get down to what's going on in life and how they express themselves and how they see things. What they do is absolute pure treasure. Yes, there's a difference between the worst artists and the best artists, but the art world is a pyramid, and at the top you've got, you know, the names we all know, like the Damien Hirst and the Tracy Emmetts in this country, and the people that sell the work for millions. But they can't exist on the top without the bottom. And so you've got this vast millions of artists and contributors to the art creative culture. And it goes near, you know, maybe if you've had an international exhibition like I have, maybe you're a bit nearer to the top, you know. But we all contribute to those people. So forget those people. It's the pyramid. And all those people in there, they have all got a conscience as well. And they've all got something to say, and they've all got talent. Maybe it's not great talent, but they should all be considered. And so, no way was I going to let any of this work out. I hadn't even gone through it all. So, I started to unfold things. There were stacks of drawings. That one stack of drawing I'm thinking of, on the wall behind it, there is a dry rot fungus this big. Looks like a massive fried egg with its tentacles just going out over the work. The other paintings, there was a row of paintings in the basement, which I'd left for a while. I thought, no, I'll deal with them later. And these paintings are all this size, and they're beautiful, perfectly stacked. And I thought, I'll leave them for a bit, because you know, they look quite good. They look clean. But that was just the one on the top. So I pulled the first one out and I thought, yeah, that's quite good, yeah. Got to the second one. There's a bit of a mark there. By the time I got to the fifth one, the dry rot fungus had already eaten away the canvas and the frame. So it had eaten the wooden frame, because it's 25 years has gone by and this stuff is just rotting away. Now, I know you're going to go, oh my God, what did you do with that? Well, all that stuff had to be binned, because there's nothing you could do with it. There were thousands of paintings, thousands of them. And it came down to a basic decision of, if I can get the canvas at the back, and if I can just rip it like that, if it just falls apart in my hand, that's beyond restoration. And don't forget, at this point, her work has got no value at all. We don't know anything, we really don't know anything about her. Gerard knows far more than I do. I haven't met her. This is 92 onwards. This is 2016. Right. Let me just have a sip of water. After I'd gone through all the paintings, we ended up with about 400 or 500 paintings. We ended up with all these etchings. Didn't know anything about William Hayter, although sadly she had, over the odd drink, mentioned that she'd work at William Hayter, but as I was not a printer, I really didn't know who William Hayter was, and I would just smile and agree, not realising that he's the most important printmaker in the 20th century, and she worked with him. But then there's all the letters. So there's letters from Schrödinger. So who's Schrödinger? Don't know Schrödinger. Yeah, he's the guy with the cat in the box. You know, it's like, and somebody says, Schrödinger? Yeah, there's a letter here. And there's a letter from John Cage, and there's a letter from somebody else. And then you go, a Nazi letter. So there's Herbert gets fired from his job in the 1930s from his university in Munich.
Marburg.
So there's the letter saying that nothing was thrown away. There was the note that Herbert had slipped through under her door saying, could we meet again, after that first evening at the German language meeting. Everything was there. And then you have the sound recordings of Fanchon talking to John Cage, and he's talking about his stuff. Because he stayed there. I didn't realise there was a very strange symmetry that in 1980, John Cage was actually in Liverpool because Merce Cunningham was at the Everyman doing some dance. And I think John Cage just simply hitched a ride. And Fanchon, who went to everything, anything cultured in Liverpool, she went to. And so, because she's this inquisitive person, just starts talking to John Cage and Merce Cunningham. The next minute they're out in the house and having drinks. But during the day, I'd gone to a workshop at one of the teacher training colleges, and that's how I got to know John Cage as well. So there was, but of course, we were in the same room together around 1980, and we didn't meet then for another 11 or 12 years. So as you go through, you accumulate all this work, you begin to realize the extent of this person who's this woman that's interested in philosophy, qualified in philosophy, qualified in art, and was great interest in philosophy. Set up a group at Liverpool University who would meet on a regular basis to talk about philosophy. You realise after so many months or weeks, maybe months, that you are a guardian here of something really valuable. And what comes to mind is how women have basically been ignored. They're the second-class citizen in a male-dominated art world. And so you see the rejections. There's the letters, the rejections. So she's working in Paris. Why didn't she do that well in Paris? Well, women didn't do that. Women didn't do that well. And then there was this real eye-opener. I went to I don't know if some of you went to it, but there was the Abstract Expressionist show at the Royal Academy a few years ago. And there's all those classic, all the paintings we know. The clays and whatever, these amazing paintings. And I'm looking at them going, that's just like Fanchon's. She's making the same marks as them. But of course I haven't put a timeline yet. All I know is I've got a lot of the rotten stuff's gone. And I've now got 500 paintings, maybe 500 prints. I've got all the printing plates, I've got all the books, and so on and so forth. But what she always did, when she finished a painting, she would stand it in front of her like this, with her head popping out the top. And somebody, maybe it was Herbert, would take a photograph of her in black and white. And sadly, we haven't got any of those. But they're great pictures of this smiling person going, look at my next abstract expressionist painting. And she hardly ever signed anything, and she hardly ever dated anything. But what they did was, the black and white photograph was always dated. So it's like, let's get back to Liverpool. It's far more interesting than London, because there's all this stuff I want to know. I want to get that painting out, and I want to look at that photograph and compare the two. So you go to the Abstract Expressionist show, and you come away with the date. So you go clay, yeah, you know, 54, 55, maybe up to the 60s, and you get back. That was the realization of how good she was. That she was producing those paintings only at similar time and fractionally after all those abstract expressionists in New York. That nobody in this country was really doing anything like that. That she'd been to Liverpool Art College, and they said, oh, you want to give up on this abstract expressionist stuff, it'll never catch on. And they made her do figurative work. She gave up very quickly, she couldn't cope with that. So, time goes on, and we now realise we've got somebody, a woman, who is an abstract expressionist of the right period who's been totally ignored. So much so, there's a really good quote from the Rose Freed Gallery about an artist in, I think it was the 1980s, and I haven't got the name in front of me, I'm sorry.
Carmen Herrera.
Thanks, Mark. Carmen Herrera was picked up by the Lisson Art Gallery. At this point, she's in her 80s. And she was an abstract expressionist working in South America. And the Lisson Gallery, which some of you might know of, is the top contemporary art gallery in London. And they started pushing her work. She'd already been to the Rose Freed Gallery, and this, don't forget, Rose is not a man, it's a woman, said, trouble is, darling, you're the wrong sex. So, that's the title I like to use now, because it's so incorrect. And we need to change those things, you know. I think it's a bit sad I'm a man standing up here trying to defend it, but maybe that's why you've got to get the old grey-haired geezers to, you know, pass the mantle on in some way, and encourage women to really, for their talents to be expressed. And hopefully, over the next year to 2 years, you'll begin to know far more about Fanchon Fröhlich. And hopefully it'll end up in an exhibition. We've got a book coming out, and so on and so forth. So, the last thing I'd like to go on to.
Would you like to show me the website?
So, I'll let Mark do a bit of shuffling around here. So we managed to we got some money off the executors, and we've now, after these couple of years, now got a website called the BARDA, which is British Art and Design Association, which is what I set up in the 80s. So it's a charity to do with developing excellence in the arts. And it's the beginning of an archive. So if you click on archive, she's the first person in the archive. And it's a post-1945 archive. Because I've got this thing about the democracy in art and how that began post-Second World War. That people from ordinary working classes had the opportunity to get the education to... and there's just some of the work, which has now been restored, cleaned, restored. I could go on for another 20 minutes, but because it's been a fascinating journey, unearthing her talent, and hopefully you'll get to know more. Thank you.
So our final speaker this evening is Richard Bright. Richard is an artist, writer and editor of Inter Alia magazine, an online magazine dedicated to the interactions between arts, sciences, and consciousness. He studied fine art and physics before founding the Inter Alia Centre in 1990. He has then lectured extensively on art and science and written many articles on people including James Turrell, Andy Goldsworthy, and Susan Durges. He's the co-author of The Art and Science by Welbeck Publishers in 2021. Tonight, Richard will discuss S.W. Hayter's research on experimental drawing as compiled in a book by Fanchon and Sylvie Lissette. Hayter's approach to experimental drawing is where one follows a certain process without being able to anticipate the consequences. The book examines some of these processes that range from a logical use of geometries to imply various dimensions of space to unconscious ways of drawing that yield novel outcomes. So it's over to Richard.
So yes, as Mark has mentioned, about a manuscript I've been editing for the last 2 years. The title of it is S.W. Hayter's Research on Experimental Drawing, with the subtitle Systems of Oscillating Perceptual Fields, Conscious and Unconscious Dialogue. And after discovering the manuscript among Fanchon's collection, Terry invited me and asked me to assess it, see if it was worthy of a book publication. And after reading it, I said, yes, it would be. So that's, say, we've been working on this for the last 2 years. And it kind of reminded me of 2 previous formulations of experimental drawing methods, which have been written in the 20th century, both being published almost simultaneously, both originating from artists in the Bauhaus. One by Paul Klee in his pedagogical sketchbooks, which later went on to be revised to the famous Thinking Eye, and the other by Kandinsky, who encapsulated and delicately with his idea, encapsulated his ideas delicately, but with sort of mathematical rigor in his book Point in Line to Plane, which was published in 1926. Stanley William Hayter was an English painter and printmaker associated in the 1930s, mainly with surrealism, and from 1940 onwards with abstract expressionism. In 1927, he founded the legendary Atelier 17, a studio in Paris, and later in New York. And Hayter introduced the artists who came to work with him in this print workshop to a multitude of experimental drawing methods. And those artists included people like Picasso, Miro, Giacometti, Dali, Chagall, Rothko, Jackson Pollock, Motherwell, and many others in New York. And the title experimental drawing is kind of ambiguous, but we ask the question, what is experimental drawing? And I'll read the introduction which Fanchon wrote in the manuscript. And she says, "It is drawing in which one follows a certain process without being able to anticipate the consequences. Indeed, the results obtained are essentially determined by the process itself. It is somewhat like performing an experiment in science, although not quite like it, where you know how to proceed, but do not know what will be the outcome. In this book, we will examine some of these processes, or games, as Hayter preferred to call them, playful processes ranging from the most conscious use of coordinates to imply various dimensions of space, to the most unconscious but not random ways of drawing that yield in an almost involuntary way quite novel outcomes. You can therefore freely invent your own games as an endless activity leading to unforeseen consequences, sometimes chaotic, sometimes unforeseeable, precise. And the principal mode of a transmission to many of the hundreds of his colleagues was by a living example, by demonstrating that of the ways one's eye, one's hand, one's relationship between conscious and unconscious can be developed in playing serious games with art. And the artists who came to his Atelier 17 were encouraged to choose only one or two operations from these numerous experimental drawing methods. One that was the most attractive, and one that was the most repellent, in which they would use to develop and then to begin to start the etching process. So a different aspect thus became embodied in the work of each colleague. Each aspect was totally different. Unfortunately, these have never been collectively recorded in a single publication until this manuscript. And the main sources of his Hayter's thoughts in developing these experimental drawings was, music, preferably, mainly sort of that included counterpoint and rhythm, mathematics, and that's mainly the general form of geometrical form of mathematics, the natural sciences that include the intrinsic aspect of various types of fields rather than isolated interactions of one object to another, and the unconscious, a process of creating mainly associated with the surrealists, which he was involved with heavily. And he used these techniques to allow the unconscious to manifest itself in works of art. So I'll show you some examples now from the book, if I can get this to work properly. So this is the proposed cover to the book, and you'll see we've taken out the subtitle, which seemed to be a bit overwordy, if you like. And this is the contents with essays written by Terry and earlier essays that were written in the manuscript by Peter Hayter and David Gascoigne. Experimental drawings have been divided into various sections, various chapters. The main one being formal operations, but it goes through in a quite a logical way in each case until we get to the end of collected drawings and emerging forms in conscious drawing. So it starts off with the former operations, or in brackets fields, which are basically used as a structural basis for further compositions. And there's a logical progressions from a a two-dimensional picture plane to an implied three-dimensional and an implied four-dimensional picture plane. And of course, there are other three-dimensional drawing systems include perspective, mainly Western perspective, and isometric drawing systems, which are mainly Islamic, Indian, and Japanese paintings. So on the left, we have a very simple, this is the start of the process, very simple horizontal parallels. And we get to figure 34 on the right for a series of progressions, where the horizontal parallels are superimposed with curves to imply 3 dimensions. And it goes on to a further progression for, on the left, a superposition of 3 divergent systems that arise outside of the picture plane, which gives this illusion of not overlapping, but a greater depth, greater 3 dimensions. And on the right, where the diagonal forms are superimposed, which described in the manuscript as a distorted space implying 4 dimensions, which I'm not entirely convinced about, because the visualization of 4 dimensions is quite difficult, and it's been used with the hypercube. And to visualize on a 2-dimensional plane a 4-dimensional space, and 4 dimensions is actually as far as you can go. You can't go any higher than 5 dimensions. You can't go to 5, 6, or up to 11 dimensions. So it kind of implies it, but I'm not perfectly entirely convinced. The one on the left is under the section called formal pattern or paths, where alternately filled intervals arising from concentric ellipses against a backdrop of concave curves. Whereas you've got the an equivalent on the right of which is under the title Formal Games, where you've got a field of randomly distributed dots that actually create a pulsating space. Sorry, on the left, this is from the section Interference, Vibration, and Moires, where you've got cyclode waves superimposed vertically and horizontally, again implying a pulsating three-dimensional space. And what was interesting in the manuscript was this diagram on the right, which showed curves derived from conic sections. When I first saw it, it immediately made me think of a physics space-time diagram. And it's interesting how throughout the manuscript there are various allusions to physics, which has been referred to before for Fanchon's obviously history of dealing with it. And this is one of Hayter's paintings, because he actually employed his experimental drawing systems within his own paintings. So you can see that underlying structure of superimposed curves, but also the distribution of different ways of creating a space on a two-dimensional plane. We now come on to the sections which involve unconscious drawing. On the left is a unconscious drawing which Fanchon produced, which involves 3 unconscious arabesques selected at random out of 20 superimposed against a Windows light, all executed on airmail paper. And on the right is a collective drawing executed by both Fanchon and Sylvie by folding the paper 5 times so that only the ends of the drawing lines are projected or visible and continue from them. So they continue this approach of unconscious drawing until the next or the final one I'll show you, which is a collective painting executed by them both, which is an example of the new way of painting known as we've heard before, collective phenomena, where a group of artists painting together influence both the collective unconscious and the conscious decision making. That's the end of just showing the examples. So basically, as I've been working on this on the manuscript to produce the book in hopefully very soon. It's been a kind of a long process. I've been obviously doing it while working on Inter Alia magazine and other writing and art projects. But we're kind of nearly there. Some of the work was online, but a lot of it had to be scanned in, reformatted, refiled, and then put into the design for the book. So I think I'm kind of on the last chapter, if you like, and hopefully that will be published soon. Now, Terry will know, we can say more about where it's going to be published and how it's going to be published. And I think that's about that about it, because a lot of what I was going to talk about has already been talked about. I'm happy to answer any questions after, if you.
So Richard, I'll leave you on screen just for a moment so you can just hear what's happening. What I will do is, first of all, thank our speakers for joining us both in person and remotely. And I have just been passed some notes by my colleague from Face Lab on behalf of the director, Caroline Wilkinson. Just something in the background for you to peruse while I speak. Face Lab is an interdisciplinary research group at Liverpool School of Art and Design, explores faces and art science interactions. Face research is in a multitude of different forms, from facial recognition to the depiction of digital avatars, and the depiction of the dead in archaeological and forensic contexts. Face Lab was approached by the Fröhlich estate and in collaboration with Barda have now produced 3 digital portraits of Fanchon, which we'll invite you downstairs in just a moment to view those. And in that space, because we're quite a small group, please feel free to ask Gerard and Terry additional questions about Fanchon, who is a wonderful person, or was a wonderful person. And I do encourage you, please, to check out right on my screen, the archive on the Barda website also.
Yeah.